Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and we're on Season 7 of Adventure Time, baby. I was not the biggest fan of Season 6 when it first aired, to the point where, at the time, I almost considered dropping the show entirely, so Season 7 was sort of the make it or break it season for me. And as you can probably tell, the season did make it for me, and I'm glad it did because Seasons 7 through 10 have some of my all-time favorite episodes. But what is it about Season 7 that renewed my love for the show? Well, before we discuss that, I just want to make one thing clear. When I talk about Adventure Time Season 7, I am referring to Bonnie and Nettie through the Thin Yellow Line. I know Bonnie and Nettie through Reboot was the intended order, and trust me, I definitely prefer this order. However, this is technically the official order of the show now. It's how most people are gonna view it, and over the years I've sort of just conditioned myself into viewing the show this way, so it would be sort of weird talking about it in its original order. I just think talking about the show like this makes things less confusing for everyone. But with all that out of the way, let's finally discuss Adventure Time Season 7. As I discussed in my last season retrospective, Season 6 is easily the most controversial season of Adventure Time. It's a season that took a lot of risks, some of which worked, but others not so much. So I think the main goal with Season 7 was to sort of bring things back to basics. There's not really any big overarching storylines this season. Instead, there's much more of a focus on these smaller character-driven stories. I mean, yeah, there is stakes, and we'll get to that later on, but that's sort of its own one-off thing. It's not like the Comet storyline from Season 6 that's spread out throughout the season. Stakes is a miniseries that's confined to its chunk of 8 episodes. So aside from stakes and a few episodes near the end of the season, Season 7 is mostly a lot of small, more mundane stories. I'll admit, there's a bit of Season 5 in Season 7, with some of these mundane slice-of-life-y stories that aren't very interesting. A few of these episodes are just a bit too dull for my liking. There's nothing terrible in this season, there's just a few episodes that don't really hold my attention. But as a whole, I'd argue that Season 7 does a much better job balancing out these more dull episodes with meaningful character journeys. So in that sense, I'd say it's much more similar to Seasons 3 and 4 than to Season 5. There's a real focus on these more personal character stories in Season 7. Episodes that don't necessarily contribute to some big overarching story, but rather give us some much needed character development. The theme of change is very prevalent throughout Season 7. We get new character dynamics, characters changing form, characters making big life decisions, characters growing up, and characters learning new skills. I mean, the theme of change is literally all over stakes. And as a whole, you can really feel the characters being pushed forward this season, sometimes in more subtle ways. Another consistent theme throughout Season 7 is that of sequel episodes, or episodes that bring back ideas from previous seasons. Cherry Cream Soda is a sequel to Root Beer Guy, Mama Said brings back Canyon from Billy's Bucket List, Football expands upon the titular character from the first 2 Grabbles episodes. Everything Stays is sort of a spiritual sequel to other Marceline flashback episodes like Memory of a Memory or Simon and Marcy. The More You Mow, The Mo You Know is a direct sequel to Be More. Angel Face brings back Meow from Jake vs. Meow. President Porpoise is Missing kind of elaborates on President Porpoise from Burning Low. Crossover is a direct sequel to Finn the Human and Jake the Dog. And the Hall of Egress finally shows us the cave Finn and Jake meant to go to in Dungeon Train. I gotta say, it's cool to see the show celebrate its history like this, while at the same time not feeling too self-indulgent or fanservice-y. The show feels like it's expanding on these ideas from older episodes, rather than just repeating them. I talked earlier about how Season 7 doesn't really have these big overarching storylines, however it does make up for this by having the first of 3 miniseries, that being Stakes. The first thing I'll say about Stakes right off the bat is that I love this miniseries format. There's a lot of Adventure Time episodes that feel sort of restricted to the 11-minute format, and as such don't really get to live out their fullest potential. But because these miniseries are all the length of a movie, they don't really have that same issue. And while Stakes is definitely my least favorite of the three, I still love it a lot, and because of its success, we were able to get Islands and Elements, two of the best stories Adventure Time's ever told in my opinion. I think where Stakes succeeds is giving Marceline the character spotlight she's desperately needed. After being almost completely absent, as well as heavily mischaracterized in Season 6, and not having the most amount of screen time in Seasons 4 and 5, Marcy desperately needed a comeback, and Stakes certainly gives her one. We get to see a lot more of her past, her insecurities about being a vampire, they highlight her relationships with the Ice King and Princess Bubblegum, and we just get to see her as the protagonist, which isn't something we got a lot of before this point in the series. Marcy's portrayal here is awesome, and it just serves as to make her a far more nuanced and complex character than she already is. Peebles also has a very strong showing in Stakes. We get to see more of her domestic life, we see her get in on some of the action, we see some of her cool gadgets, and we get some really solid character growth from her. We see her acknowledge her faults and grow as a person, which is pretty awesome. Oh, and it obviously goes without saying that this was a great miniseries for Bubbleen fans. I mean, it's basically a precursor to Obsidian with how much ship teasing there is. Finn and Jake mostly serve as comic relief characters, and thus don't get a ton to do, but honestly, I've never really minded that. The story isn't really about them, and they get some of the better jokes in the miniseries, so I can't really complain. The Vamps themselves are awesome. They all have really fun personalities that make for great one-off villains. I like how they each get an episode dedicated to defeating them. I also like the splash screen we get at the end of most of the episodes tallying which Vamps have been defeated. It helps add to the sense of progression. Honestly, the only one I was kinda disappointed by was the Vampire King himself. I feel like they made him just a little too pathetic for my liking, but that's just me. Stakes has a great sense of atmosphere to it. I love the darker shading and moodier tone. It really sets these episodes apart from the rest of the series. Makes for a great miniseries to rewatch at around Halloween time. As far as some of my criticisms go, I'm kinda mixed on the comedy in Stakes. I think most of the comedy in Stakes works really well, but there's just a few jokes here and there that sorta drag on too long and take a little bit away from the tone that these episodes are going for. And my only other big criticism is I'm not crazy about the way Stakes end. I feel like Marcy being mortal and PB being exiled from her kingdom were both ideas that the show could have done a lot more with. With Marcy, I at least sorta get it. It is her story after all, and it does fit with the everything stays theme. Though I still feel like her being mortal is an idea that could have been explored more. But with PB, I just don't feel like we spend enough time with her before she gets her kingdom back. Stakes gave her some great character growth, but she just needed a little more in my opinion. Plus, I also really love King of Zoo, and I really wish she got more screen time. Tell Bubblegum I wear her nightgown. Tell everyone! Despite my few criticisms, I really like Stakes as a whole. It's a very spooky, fun time that gives Marceline the much-needed spotlight she deserves. It's still my least favorite miniseries, but it's only my least favorite out of 3 really good miniseries. And man, I am really excited to talk about Islands and Elements. Season 7 is a bit of a quieter year for Finn as a whole. Aside from a few episodes near the end of the season, he doesn't get a ton of character growth this time around. But honestly, considering how much he went through last season and how much he's going to go through in the next few seasons, I'm actually kind of alright with that. Season 7 gives Finn a bit of a break from the crazy life-changing stuff, and I think that's alright. I'd argue the same mostly applies to Jake this year. We get a much more relaxed portrayal of Jake in Season 7, the kind of guy who just wants to hang out and support his friend. He does get a bit of a mini arc in Stakes, but even that is nothing too notable. It's a bit of a bummer that Jake doesn't get any spotlight episodes this season, but I still enjoy his portrayal here overall. I talked about PB pretty at length already while discussing Stakes, so I'm gonna keep her section brief. Even though I wish we got to see a little more of it, PB being exiled from her kingdom and trying to build a new life for herself was a really cool new dynamic. Season 7 gives us a much more humble PB, one who recognizes her mistakes and tries to move past them. She doesn't appear a ton in the second half of the season, though the thin yellow line does a good job showcasing how much she's changed as a ruler. Much like with Season 6, Season 7 isn't the biggest year for the Ice King. However, I do like how all of his major appearances this season showcase his relationship with a different main character. His relationship with Marceline is explored in The Empress Eyes, as well as briefly in The Dark Cloud. He gets an adorable subplot with BMO in President Porpoise is Missing, and we get to see him go on an adventure with Finn and Jake in Kane's Ransom. This episode is basically the one that solidifies the fact that Ice King, Finn, and Jake are friends now in my mind, which is honestly one of my favorite dynamics in the series. So yeah, even if this isn't his biggest year, I'm still really happy with the Ice King's portrayal this season as a whole. I pretty much said everything I needed to say about Marcy while discussing Stakes, so we can almost skip her. The only thing I really need to add here is that because of Stakes, as well as the episode Varmints, she has a total of 9 major appearances this season, making it her most prominent year on the show. Granted, she's basically absent for the entire second half of the season, but when she has an entire mini-series focused on her, that's kinda hard to complain about. Weirdly enough, aside from Marceline, I'd actually argue BMO is the biggest winner in Season 7. Seriously, the little guy gets 3 major episodes entirely focused on him, one of which being a 2-parter, as well as big supporting roles in episodes like President Porpoise is Missing, Blinkhead Girl, and Bad Jubies. So basically, if you're a huge BMO fan, then this is definitely the season for you. As you can probably tell, I really like Season 7. It's not my absolute favorite season of the show or anything, but after having 2 seasons that are very mixed in terms of quality, it's nice to have just a very consistently solid season of Adventure Time. It moves the show forward in a new direction, while also not feeling too drastically different from what came before it, which is what you want out of a later season of a long-running show. It makes me really glad I stuck with the show over years and didn't just drop it after Season 6. I think it's a very rewarding season for longtime fans of the show. But how do you guys feel about Season 7? Did it manage to hold your interest, or did you drop the show entirely? I'm definitely curious to see how casual fans feel about this season. Anyways, I'll see you guys in my top 10 list, and Kirby out.